February is Cancer Awareness Prevention Month, and we are talking about genetic testing and how it can help people understand their risk factors. We have Ruth Tennant, Senior Product Scientist at 23andMe, Mathew Knowles, who's the Global Ambassador for 23andMe, of course, also music executive, male breast cancer survivor, and father of Beyonce and Solange. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew, first of all, I want to start with you. You're 5 years out, you're in remission. I mean, congratulations on that milestone.
Well, very, very proud, very proud.
And, as far as, men and their health, obviously sometimes we don't talk about it. We don't take the proper testing. We don't use the proper resources. I mean, talk a little bit about being this global ambassador for 23andMe and what it's like to reach out to maybe a demographic of people or of men who maybe have not been interested in this, in the past.
Are you sure you weren't listening to our conversation before we started talking to you on this interview? Because
I did not know. I did not. But here's the thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Because Ruth and I were just talking about, one of the advantages of genetic testing, because men, we don't like to go to the doctors, is genetic testing, because it allows us to know if we're predisposed to certain types of cancers and diseases. So it becomes a real heightened benefit for men to get genetic testing. But for myself, I didn't know much about genetic testing until my surgery. Literally, that's when I got genetically tested. I knew that on my mother's side there was a predisposition for breast cancer. I also knew on my father's side, my grandfather and four of my uncles died of prostate cancer. I'm what's called BRCA2 variant, which means I have a higher risk for both, as well as melanoma and pancreatic cancer. So knowledge is power. That's the advantage of getting genetic tested. You don't know what you don't know. So, again, I want to reinforce for men, this could possibly be a good answer for you, a good substitute, since we don't like to go to the doctor, which is not good. I'm not an advocate for that at all, but I certainly would rather you get a genetic test than do nothing.
Do nothing. And as far as this genetic testing goes, Ruth, if you want to talk a little bit about, the variants of the 1 and 2, and then also too, once people get this information, what should be the next steps that they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So BRCA1 and 2 are regular genes that everybody has, and their normal job is to help repair broken DNA inside of our cells. But about 1 in 200 people inherits a genetic variant or a mutation that prevents one of those genes from functioning properly, and that's what leads to the increased risk for cancer that Dr. Knowles mentioned, and that's true both in females and in males. Now, the good news is that if you have this information, you have a variant, there are steps you can take to reduce your risk. So the first step, if you tested with 23andMe, you'd want to talk to your doctor to get confirmatory testing and then discuss options for cancer, prevention and risk reduction. So in the case of females, that might include enhanced screening. It could include certain medications, certain surgeries. For males as well, increased screening and surveillance. We do know, unfortunately, that more than 80% of people with a BRCA variant don't know they have one because they've never gotten this genetic testing.
And I guess, I'm going to ask both of you, but Matthew, when you got your report and you got to see, your genetic background, what did you do with this information? How did you process everything? And maybe some lifestyle changes or things that you did as far as, obviously we could talk a little about nature versus nurture, but the things that you were in control of, how did you make some of those changes for yourself?
Well, you're absolutely right. There were lifestyle changes that I made, changing my diet, exercising. I walk every other day, 2 miles. I've lost about 25 pounds and I still need to lose 10 more, working on that. But those are some of the lifestyle changes and some of the preventive ways that we can all enhance our life. And so it's so important to get a genetic test so that you, again, have knowledge is power and having that information at your disposal.
And Ruth, one of the things that scares me, and obviously, when you read a lot about the testing and the conditions and the things that people are going through, you think especially our youth and you think of the rise in colon cancer, the rise in lung cancer and people and non-smokers. I think these are two big things that we're seeing a lot of. Talk a little bit about this genetic testing, or are these more environmental that is kind of taking place kind of in the past, decade or so?
Yeah, I mean, genetics plays a role for everyone, right? It can increase or decrease your risk in some way, but absolutely environment plays a huge role that can probably help explain why there are rising incidences, especially among young people, of certain cancers. But I think understanding your genetic risk from the get-go can be a really good first step, regardless of all the environmental factors, right? You know where you're started, you can figure out the best steps for you, and you can work with your healthcare provider to make sure that you take action to reduce that risk.
And what age do you suggest 23andMe? And obviously, I think parents, and also thinking, from a parent perspective is like, well, let me test my baby as soon as they're born and see what we can do. I mean, what's the point of like being proactive, but not kind of letting this kind of take over your life? Because it can easily do that,
Yeah. So 23andMe is intended for adults 18 and over, but it can still provide useful information for people, for example, starting a family, right? You can determine whether you carry genetic variants you could pass down to your children, in addition to variants that impact your own health.
Mathew, let's talk a little bit about, maybe some of those conversations with men, because I think about myself, and sometimes, you're afraid to go to the doctor, you get some test results that maybe, either your weight or your blood sugar, or, something is not necessarily where you want it to, or you don't talk to relatives about the conditions that they had or things that might, be passed on. But maybe opening up that door of just being open, to yourself, to, your friends, your family, and seeing them kind of embrace this and making, the changes they want, or at least just be aware of, what their risks are.
Well, I think it's important for families to talk about their family risk. But again, through genetic testing, you can gather that information and use it in a very useful way with your referring physician. I just, again, think as we started this conversation, and the more we've had a number of interviews today, that also can be a very useful tool for men. We haven't talked about that much, but let's face it, men don't like to go to the doctor. And this could be a real useful tool to know if you're predisposed, then hopefully you would make that decision to go to a doctor.
And Ruth, you get the report back, you see what your risks are. Is this something that you suggest people take to their doctor? Because obviously, I think of like a colon cancer screening, you have to be 45 to do that. But if you're somebody in your 30s, you see you're genetically, that's in your family history, can you go to your doctor? Because I know sometimes they'll do different testing, or they'll give you a different, treatment if they know, you're genetically disposed to, different conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, if you got a variant detected in your BRCA2 selected variants report from 23andMe, the first step absolutely is talk to your doctor, get confirmatory testing, and then discuss those options, right? So there might be earlier screenings that would be recommended. So start mammograms and breast MRIs at an earlier age. There might be surgeries that could prevent cancer from developing at all. So absolutely, once you learn about that risk, the next step is to talk to your clinician to figure out what those personalized next steps are for you.
Wonderful. And then let's close things out. Mathew, I want to ask you one fun Beyonce question. I think, at the Grammys, she had that surprise look of when she actually won the award, and everybody was, genuinely just like their hearts just warmed up just seeing just how surprised she was. But I'm sure, as a parent, you saw that look, whether she got a good grade, if you're going on a vacation, if she was in trouble. Like, is there another point where you saw that, like, that shocked look in her face growing up?
Well, that was truly a shock look, by the way, because it was for the country album of the year.
Yeah.
I knew album of the year, overall album of the year, was very important to her. She really, truly, as many were shocked, for the country music album of the year. But yes, I've seen that look before. I saw that look when she won that Grammy that made her the winningest Grammy winner in the history of music. So Beyonce's won awards that Destiny's Child was the #1 female pop R&B group in the history of music. So she's been on the end of some very, very historical events in music history.
Wonderful. We cannot wait to see that tour. And Ruth, you can let us know where you can find more information.
Yeah, you can learn more at 23andme.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.